I am so excited to talk to my guest today. She is an author. She is an activist. She is the co-founder of Code Pink, and she has just been doing amazing work over the years for the cause of peace in the world. So please welcome to the show, Medea Benjamin. Medea, how are you?
I'm good. Nice to be on with you, Ron.
Good to see you, and thanks so much for doing this. And of course, thanks so much for everything you do. So let's start currently, and then I want to get into some stuff that you actually put out today. But we have a new administration. What are some kind of things we can be going about to try to de-escalate war with the Biden administration, if anything? Like what are some things out there that kind of give you that are actions worth taking and are worthwhile pursuits that are also realistic?
At the top of the list, I'd put stop the U.S. support for Yemen. And this is something that Biden has said that he would do, which is very exciting. This is a war that the U.S. has been in from the time of the Obama administration, supplying the Saudis with all of these bombs that have been destroying civilian infrastructure and killing so many people in Yemen. And now with the pandemic, the last thing that the Trump administration did was to call the Houthis, one of the groups fighting in Yemen, a terrorist organization, which means it's now even hard for humanitarian groups to get aid to the sections controlled by the Houthis. So we have to lift that designation, get that humanitarian aid in, and stop the war. So that's a good place to start.
So let's get into some of the stuff that you've put out today. You published this piece on Common Dreams. You co-authored it with Ariel Gold, Rob Malley for Iran Envoy, a test case for Biden's commitment to diplomacy. So why is Rob Malley your choice here? Kind of sum up what's going on there.
Well, the rumor came out a couple of days ago that Rob Malley was being considered as the U.S. envoy for Iran. And this would be then the person in charge of getting the U.S. back into the Iran nuclear deal. This is something that has been opposed by the Saudis, the Israelis, the war hawks in the U.S. Congress, particularly people like Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, the conservatives in the Iranian American community. And Rob Malley is somebody who would be fantastic for this job because he was the lead White House negotiator when the deal was first signed under Obama in 2015. But he also has a history of being a diplomat, something so lacking in the last administration and frankly in many U.S. administrations. He believes in talking to all sides, in trying to understand from their perspective. And so he would be a fantastic pick. But these groups that I just mentioned have come down hard in the last few days saying, no, you can't have Rob Malley. He's an anti-Semite because he said that the Camp David Accords fell through because of not just the Palestinians, but the fault was also of the Israelis. And that he's talked to Hamas, which is a group that governs in Gaza, but has been designated a terrorist organization. But diplomats speak to all sides. So of course he would speak to Hamas. Others have said he doesn't care about the human rights situation in Iran, which is totally not true. And they've given other kinds of excuses because they don't want to see the U.S. going back into the Iran nuclear deal. They don't want to see an easing of the tensions with Iran. Your listeners and viewers might remember that early last year, the Trump administration almost brought us into a full-out shooting war with Iran in early January when they killed the top general of Iran, Qasem Soleimani. And ever since then, it's been so tense. So it's important that we get an envoy from Iran who really believes in diplomacy and we get back into that nuclear deal. So we put this out. We also put a petition out because these right-wing groups put out their petition, and we want to make sure that we get more people on our petition. So you can go to the Code Pink website and find that petition and sign on.
You know, Medea, I have to ask, because I couldn't help but hear a couple things. Do you literally live on the line of the peace train? like, is that what I was hearing? Was that what it was?
You heard the train go by. Sorry about the noise, but the train does go by very close to here.
No worries, no worries. I just had to ask. I had to ask. I was like, she might live. I guess the peace train is a real thing, and it stops at Medea's place. I like it.
And we all have to get on board.
I'm ready. You let me know where the stop's at. I'll be there. We'll get on board. I actually wanted to ask you about some about Iran. Do you think that had it not been for the pandemic kind of, being all, being a pandemic, do you think that we would have probably gotten to an all-out war with Iran? Like, do you think that would have been Trump's war had the pandemic not kind of, pushed us away from that?
I thought that we were going to war in January when they killed Soleimani. I thought, how can the Iranians not respond by killing Americans? And it's very amazing that they responded through their Iraqi friends in hitting some U.S. bases, but making sure that they would hit places where nobody would get killed. More recently, the Israelis killed an Iranian nuclear scientist inside Iran. And I thought, once again, the Iranians are going to have to respond by bombing Israel. And then the U.S. would respond by bombing Iran. And there we are. So I have been holding my breath this whole time that Trump has been whipping up the conflict with Iran. And I think you're right. We're not out of the woods yet, though, because there was somebody very close to Bibi Netanyahu who has said that if the U.S. goes back in the Iran nuclear deal, that Israel might have to bomb Iran on its own. So we have to rein in our, quote, friends in the region, the Israelis and the Saudis, and really remake U.S. relationships in the Middle East. It has been so one-sided. Ron, I don't know what you know, if much, about Iranian culture and Iranian people, but they're more naturally U.S. allies than, let's say, the Saudis would be. They love Western culture. And they have an incredibly long, beautiful culture of poetry, of architecture, of music, of film. If you haven't seen Iranian films, they are fantastic. And it makes a lot more, and they have a more vibrant political system. It's not a dictatorship, an absolute monarchy like the Saudis. There are elections, and elections do matter in Iran. And in fact, the last parliamentary elections mattered a lot because thanks to Trump's hard line with Iran, the hardliners in Iran won the majority of seats, meaning the people who said, why bother even talking to the United States? They're a bunch of liars. They sign an agreement with us and then they pull out. They impose these sanctions that are meant to make our lives miserable, meant to keep us from getting the cancer medicine we need, the relief for COVID that we need. They're the devils. Why talk to them? And then there's elections coming up for president in Iran in June. And it's very likely that a more hardline person will win in that campaign. So what I'm saying is that it makes more sense for the U.S. to have a normal relationship with Iran. I'm not saying cut off ties with the horrific Saudi regime. I'm saying have a more balanced relationship with all of the governments in the Middle East, whether we like them or not.
So let's stay on Iran for a little bit because, I've read your book, Inside Iran. It was a while ago when I read it, but I remember. I mean, I've since recommended it to other people because you just went throughout history, and it was just kind of this crash course, and the theme through every single era was they were doing all these great things, and then we showed up and did all kinds of horrible things, and then we did it again and again. It was kind of a decade thing for us. We just come back. So,
well, wait, decades. And, that's important, Ron, to reiterate that the problems with Iran in terms of U.S. relations and in terms of a theocracy that runs Iran today can be traced back to 1953 U.S. CIA overthrowing a democratically elected government of Mossadegh. And then there's, the line through those decades leading up to today with the U.S. screwing over the Iranian people over and over and over again. So it's a terrible example of U.S. imperialism, U.S. hubris, thinking that we can put our guys in leadership like the Shah, who is so repressive, and the people aren't going to rise up against that. And more recently, that we can so squeeze the Iranian economy that even people who hate their own government in Iran, and there are lots of them, are anti-American because they see what the U.S. is doing to them. So yes, we have a history of doing this in many places around the world, but Iran is probably the number one example of how we can screw up a country that wants to be our friend.
How do you, and I'm sure this has just evolved over the years, but how do you, from where you're sitting as a peace activist, how have you battled the, just obvious propaganda in our world of, hey, no, we're the force for good around the world. We're doing good out there. How do you come back to that?
It's tough, Ron, because when you do that, it is taken by some people to mean you don't love your country, you're anti-American. It's tough to tell people that our foreign policy has caused millions of people to die and be displaced and to be maimed, and because we live in, as Gore Vidal said, the United States of amnesia. People either forgot about U.S. history or never learned about it. So it is a tough one. And I think, I think one thing is to educate people about it. When I was a young woman in my late teens, I traveled to Central America, and that's how I learned about what my government had been doing in Central America, overthrowing democratically elected governments, supporting right-wing dictatorships, and later supporting death squads. It took me going outside the U.S. to learn about the effects of our foreign policy. Now we're in COVID time, people can't travel. I used to tell people, get out of the U.S. just to see it from the outside. But it's important to read about U.S. history, to try to look at the world from the point of view of other countries. For example, let's just go back to Iran for a minute. We talked about the U.S. rejoining the Iran nuclear deal. I would think most Americans think Iran bad. They want to get nuclear weapons. We can't let them get them because they're crazy people and they will bomb our friends in Israel. Well, what does it look like from the point of view of Iranians? It looks like here are these imperial Americans who go around the world invading and stealing other countries' resources, and they have thousands of nuclear weapons. And then their friends in Israel who have been oppressing the Muslim population since the beginning of that country, and have been developing their own nuclear weapons, but won't tell the world community how many they have, won't allow any inspectors, won't sign on to any international treaties. And here we are, Iran, and we're supposed to not have a nuclear weapon, and we're supposed to allow the most invasive inspections ever designed as part of this Iran nuclear deal. So the only way the U.S. can get away with pushing Iran like this is because out there is the law of the jungle and might makes right. But, it's at our own peril, because if we want to get out of these wars in the Middle East, if we want the U.S. not to create a new war with a nuclear country like China, we not only have to learn about the effects of our government's policies, but we have to get active. We have to build a stronger anti-war movement. We have to get people to be reaching out to their members of Congress and to this new administration and say, we want a totally different way of being in the world.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your